Welcome back to Karl Bodmer Live here at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I'm taking you on this adventure in 4 segments. Now, the first 2 segments were all about the trip from my birth through wild western North America and back to Europe. Now, this 3rd segment is taking all of this information and turning it into a saleable form, the atlas. Upon returning to Europe, time was immediately spent turning all of this into the printing plates that we used to eventually print the atlas. We used a printing form called intaglio. Now, intaglio is essentially a form where you take a flat surface, we used copper and steel, and you incise a negative of the image that you want to print into that surface, and then you ink it and run it through a printing press. Specifically, what we did, we used etchings and engravings. Engravings is where you just take tools and cut into the surface whatever negative image you want. With etching, you sort of use a stencil, and then you use an acid to burn into that metal. One step further is aquatint, where you use an acid-resistant resin along with the acid to get different shades and different hues of black on your paper. Now, the contract that I had with Max in 1836 stipulated that I was in charge of all of the printing, so I was very closely involved every step of the way. But I was also in charge of sales throughout England and Paris. I didn't really know much about sales, so I went to Paris when I was exhibiting a group of artworks that I'd already done. I pulled out some of the aquatints in the hope of attracting some attention. Now, I did exactly that, but not in the way that I expected. A group of artisans came up to me asking if they could be involved with the project. So I hired them on. At one point, we had 26 artisans helping with the engraving process. We had to go through 400 plus sketches and watercolors to create the 81 final prints. This was a lot of work, so I'm glad that I had these artisans to help me out. We ended up pulling all of these together and creating these 81 prints. Now, of these 81, 33 were used as vignettes for the chapter prefaces. This book, or atlas, was eventually sold in many different ways. The prince had high hopes for it. You could buy it on any of 3 different types of paper, black and white or color, in German, French, or English. The German edition, being the first edition, was actually sold as a subscription. As we printed things out, we sent them out to the people who were purchasing them. The text tended to precede the images only because it took so much more work to actually create the prints. Now, one detail that the prince hadn't really thought of is the fact that I was a terrible businessman. When the prince's final product, the Travels in the Interiors of North America, 1832 to 1834, was finally published after many delays in 1841, it was a complete financial failure, fell flat on its face. So I suggested that maybe we put out a smaller, less expensive version, just the pictures. So we did exactly that to try and recoup the costs. North America in Pictures came out. We'd intended on doing a second volume, but never really got around to it. One other detail that we hadn't really thought of is that intaglio was to become completely superseded by lithography in 1836 when John James Audubon published his book, Birds of North America. So it looked like this was going to be a complete failure. I sent almost all of the works that I'd done on this trip back to prints. I left the printing plates and any extra stuff that I had with a friend of mine in Paris, and they were retrieved by the secretary of the Nouvelle Estate in 1856. I returned to Europe. I moved to Barbizon, near the Fontainebleau forest, near Paris. I associated myself with a group of artisans, later to become known as the Barbizon Group. I befriended people like Jean-Francois Millet and Claude Monet. Surrounded myself with these people in hopes of sort of jumping on their tailcoats and finding the fame that I truly believed I deserved. Monet and myself really became fond of a certain tree, later become known as the Bodmer oak. So it looked like this project, this atlas, was doomed to fail. But I just kept hoofing it. I kept making a career as an artist, surrounded myself with these famous and incredibly proficient artists. But this atlas was not going anywhere. So how did this atlas, this magnificent financial failure, become the masterpiece that it is today? All to come in the next segment of Karl Bodmer Live.